Ramchal is speaking about prophecy. What is prophecy? What's the value of prophecy? What are the prophets? What does the prophet know? Just a little bit of an introduction. The Torah tells us a story that Ishmael was the son of Avram, and he was the child of the Egyptian princess by the name of Hagar was his mother. And Avram had fathered a child from her, because Sarah, his wife, had given Hagar to Avram to bear a child. At the age of 86, Yitzchak was born when Avram was 100 years old. A miracle child. Sarah Imenu was 89 when she conceived. She gave birth at the age of 90. The age difference between Avram and Sarah was 10 years. The Torah tells us that Sarah saw Yishmael mitzachek. He was acting with levity. She goes to Avram and says, "You must drive this maidservant with a son from the house. He has to be taken out of the house." Why? Because the behavior of Yishmael touches upon idolatry, upon murder, and upon illicit sexual relations. Although he didn't do that, but his behavior indicates that's the direction he's going. And therefore, for our son Yitzchak, who's the future patriarch of the Jewish people, this will minimize and compromise his ability. Therefore, you must drive him from the home with his mother. They'll be driven out. Avram, hearing this, was very distressed. And Hashem says to Avram through a prophecy, whenever Sarah tells you, you heed her voice. And the Minchas tells us that in prophecy, Sarah Imenu, Sarah the matriarch, she was a greater prophetess than Avram was a prophet. Therefore, you should heed her word. And if she's telling you to drive him out, her evaluation is perfectly accurate. He will compromise Yitzchak. And Yitzchak will not be the patriarch who's meant to be. Avram, the next day, gives them a flask of water, some bread, sends them on their way. Before they turn around, Ishmael is dying of thirst. And his mother, Hagar, who's a devoutly righteous woman, she's beside herself and she's crying. And Ishmael's praying for himself. And he's dying of thirst in the desert. And the Torah tells us, the Yishma Hashem es kol anar bashu sham. God heard the voice of the lad where he was at that moment. What do you mean? Torah should say, and what happens all of a sudden? An oasis revealed itself, and his mother went and took water from the oasis, gave it to him, and that's how he survived. It was a miracle. But the Torah tells us, God heard the voice of the lad, of the youth, where he was at that moment. What does it mean, where was that moment? So Rashi says to the Midrash that the angels came before God and said, you should not perform a miracle on his behalf. Bet he should die. Why? Because in the future, when the Jewish people are going to go into exile after the destruction of the first temple, and they're going to be starving and thirsty, their cousins, the Ishmaelites, are going to go out towards them, and they're going to offer him salty fish to eat, to satisfy their hunger. And then they're going to give him skins, which supposedly had water in them to quench their thirst, because they were very thirsty from the salty herring, salty fish. And rather than water being in those skins, it was just stale air. And when they opened it, they inhaled that stale air, they would die. That's what happened. These are our good brothers, the Arabs. So the angel said, you mean to say you're going to let this man survive this and perform the miracle, and his children in the future are going to kill your children? They're going to cause thousands of Jews to die. Are you going to have mercy on their forefather? Bet he should die. So God says to the angels, and that may be true in the future, but who is Yishmael today? Is he tzaddik or is he Rosh? Is he devout or is he evil? God says, they said, no, he's devout. So because today he's devout, what's going to be in the future has no relevance to now. Therefore, it says God heard the voice of the youth where he was at that moment. Since today's classification is tzaddik, is devout, therefore God performed a miracle on his behalf. That's the Midrash. So it's an obvious question. They said, he should die. Why should he die? Because in the future, his descendants are going to feed them that salty fish, then offer him these flasks, these skins with water, and there's not going to be water, it's going to be stale air, and they're going to die. But factually, if Yishmael is going to die now, there is no future. How do we understand it? There's only a future if Yishmael survives. So if they see through their divine vision, the angels, that there will be descendants, so evidently the answer is right there. He's not dying. So what do you say he should die? You following the question? The angel said he should die now because of what his descendants are going to do. But if the descendants, that means God doesn't want him to die now. Because he dies now, there are no descendants. So how do we understand it? Question which is asked. The answer which is given, I'll tell you a story. There was a great Torah sage, lived in the latter part of the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century. His name was Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. He himself innovated an analytical approach how to study Talmud, which is studied since then throughout the world till today. One of a kind of analysis. His approach, he had a level of genius, and he was able to see things so clearly that he was able to create an approach to analysis that he took things which were not understandable, and after he explained them, you couldn't understand what the original difficulty was. That's how seamless his explanation was. Rav Chaim Brisker was chief rabbi of Brisk, but his family name was Soloveitchik. The level of genius was, if let's say a person would author a Torah work, and in that work there were 50 subjects discussed, Rav Chaim Brisker would have to speak to the person for 5 minutes. That's it. Just to get his trend of thought, how his mind works. He could tell you every one of those subject matters in that book that he authored, exactly the type of question he asks, the answer he gives. From that evaluation for 5 minutes, he was able to see exactly how he processed anything he'd ever studied. And he was able to tell you exactly what was contained in that book without reading the Sefer, without studying that book. It's a genius beyond our comprehension what genius is. Why did Sarah Imenu want Yishmael to be driven from the house? Sarah the matriarch. Because she saw certain things in his behavior which ultimately will lead to very extreme levels of transgression. And she saw that, and she saw the way everything would manifest itself, eventually what he would become, which would become a bandit, a gangster. Therefore, she said to Avram, our child being exposed to this level of behavior, although it's at its infant stage, it would compromise him, diminish him, and he'll never, ever develop to be the patriarch. And Hashem says, I confirm what she says. You should listen to her prophetic voice. She's right. Drive him out with his mother. The angels, if Yishmael dies, there's no future. But what the angels saw in Yishmael, that if they allow the generations to evolve and become, ultimately, his descendants will feed fish, salty fish to the Jewish people when they go into exile, offer them empty skins with stale air, and when they inhale it, they will die. So it's not they saw that they were descendants. Evolving from this moment, they understood what will evolve because of what Yishmael innately represented. There's a question. The first test of Avram was when he was given the ultimatum, either bow to the idol or go into the kiln. Avram says, I'm going to the kiln. I prefer to die to sanctify God's name rather than bowing to an idol. What happened? Miraculously, he came out alive. His clothing weren't even singed. When God performed the miracle for Avram to come out of the kiln, they were prosecuting angels, and they said, but you realize if he comes out of the kiln, he's going to have descendants who are evil. Who are they? Esau. Esau is a grandson of Avram. So why perform the miracle on his behalf? He's going to have an evil descendant, which will create havoc to the world. He'll be the counterforce to spirituality. So therefore, don't perform the miracle on the behalf of Avram to allow him to live. That's what the prosecuting angel said. So God answered them saying, I'm not concerned about Esau. Why? Because he's going to have a grandson by the name of Yaakov. Yaakov will be the counterforce to that evil. So therefore, we're not worried. But the question is, we just finished saying, when God, here by the Yishmael, is he tzaddik now or Rasha? That's the question. He's tzaddik. If that's the case, God says, I'll perform the miracle. Avram at that time was definitely tzaddik. He was giving his life to die. So they said to him, what's the value to let him live? Look what he's going to produce. Look what kind of descendants he's going to have. He's going to have evil descendants. Why did God answer like this? Is he tzaddik now or is he Rasha now? The same thing that he answered the angels with Yishmael. Right? But he didn't give that answer. It's just because there's going to be a person who's going to be a counterforce by the name of Yaakov. And Yaakov will be the counterforce for the Esau. You following my question?
Yes, Rabbi. But why wasn't there a counterforce in the original thing? I mean, all his descendants weren't going to be evil. Perhaps they saw evil, but someone was going to show up who was some level of tzaddik, because he wasn't tzaddik at one time. So there was never a counterforce, and nobody saw it to let him live and let it all work out.
Where's this, by Yishmael or by Avram?
Yishmael.
Yishmael, God did let him live. Why did God let him live? Because he says he's a tzaddik now. He's not a Rasha. That's the future. Right now, he's a tzaddik. Therefore, I can't take his life now. So why, when with the angels, when he went into the kiln, the angel says, why performing the miracle on his behalf? He's going to have an evil descendant. God should answer the same thing. But who is he? Who's Avram? He's righteous. Therefore, I performed the miracle. What do I care about the descent? That's the future. That's not the present. He should have answered the same thing, but that's not what he answered him. Yeah. The answer was, in the future, we have Yaakov to contend with that. He will be the counterforce to that evil. He should answer more simply. Right now, what is Avram? Is he tzaddik? Therefore, I performed the miracle on his hand. What the future is going to bring, the future is not relevant to the present.
But Rabbi, a whole bunch of people in the future are going to get wiped out based on stale air and the skins and so on. I mean, it's a coin. It's not more than a coin to us. We have Yishmael. He's a tzaddik right now, but well, okay, got it. All right. I think. Okay. Thanks. I don't know that there was a question there. I apologize.
This is the difference. Yishmael he's going to have evil descendants. Do you want to save a man who's going to have evil descendants? Question, what does he know? Is he tzaddik or Rosha? Tzaddik. God says, I will perform the miracle on his behalf. That's it. So a wellspring appeared, and his mother gave him water, and he was able to survive. Avram Avinu, what he did, he deserved the share in the world to come, the greatest share. He's the first man who's giving his life to sanctify God's name. So the question is, why perform the miracle on his behalf? That he should survive. Let him go to the world to come, and he succeeded. He accomplished what he's meant to succeed. So the answer is, because it has value to let him live. What's the value? To produce evil people. Yishmael did, you understand? Avram went into the kill. That should have been enough to give him a share in eternity, which is one of a level. So why have him live? The answer is because he's have descendants. Well, what kind of descendants is he going to have? They're evil people. Better let him be part of eternity and let him bask in God's glory. Yishmael, that wasn't the question. The question is, does God perform a miracle on his behalf? Had nothing to do about him giving his life to sanctify God's name. So purely the value is because his own worth now. But what about the future? God says, well, what is he now? If he's tzaddik, he deserves I should perform the miracle on his behalf.
Right.
By Avram, there's an alternative. By not living, he has a share in the world to come because of what he did. The act itself is an act of sanctification of God's name. And that God says, because you know what has greater value, you should live. Because since the Yaakov is the ultimate, he's the ultimate patriarch to father the Jewish people, he will live, he will his descendants, it's worthwhile he should live, despite the evil that's going to come from Avram. Because who's the father of the Jewish people? Yaakov. If Avram perishes in the kiln, there's no Yaakov. That's why he's surviving the kiln. So the angels didn't understand that. They said, well, look at the evil descendants he's going to have. It's irrelevant who the evil descendants are, but there's going to be a Yaakov. Yaakov's going to be the father of Jewish people, and they're going to be the representation of God in the world. Therefore, it's worthwhile that he should survive despite his Esau, because there's a Jewish people to counter whatever that Esau represents.
Right. And isn't it then so that, in effect, every tzaddik, going back to Avram, has some evil descendants? So therefore, you're right. You cannot measure those people in the future. You can only measure what's happening with the current person. I mean, every family has some.
Right. You're right. If you're righteous enough, God will perform the miracle for the person, regardless of what kind of sense he has. But with Avram, was a different question. Let him go to the world to come now. Why hold him up? Why save his life? Let him go. He sanctified his life, sanctified God by giving his life. Let him go to the world to come. Why are they holding him up?
Yeah, terrific, Rabbi. Thank you.
Aaron, you have the answer.
No, I hear the answer. I have just a little confusion, maybe following up on Larry's question. I hear what the Rav says in terms of Yishmael, but wasn't the Rav has said many times, wasn't the whole, like from the beginning of time, we knew the Torah tells us Yishmael would be Para Adam, wild beast of a man, and there would always be that force of evil, and Hashem knew
Let's make a
the
difference.
different
But right now,
exiles.
he's a tzaddik. He's still a tzaddik. He's in
Oh,
tzaddik.
I understand. He's a tzaddik, but wasn't it certain that the Bnei Yishmael would be wild beasts of men
He
and
will.
cause such
He
problems?
personally
for
will
us?
become a bandit. Yishmael became a highwayman eventually. At this age, he was a tzaddik.
Uh-huh.
15 years down the road, he becomes a highwayman. He'll kill, he'll plunder, he'll do everything. But is that a reason to take him out right now?
Right, I
Right
said,
now,
but at that
tzaddik.
point in time, and my only question wasn't the whole plan that Hashem had, we always have the choice, there would be forces of good and evil, and from the beginning of time, Hashem knew that Yishmael's descendants would cause problems for us, and the same thing with Esau. Like,
You think about what I said. Any other questions? I want to stop now. Okay. All right, think what I said, we'll continue tomorrow on this.
Okay,
Okay. Everybody,
1:15?
Shmuel, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Go
I
ahead.
understand the concept that Ishmael was not judged for what was going to happen in the future. So my question to you is, if you have a bad thought and if nothing's happened, obviously at that time, are you judged for having a bad thought that you might not, but you probably will never do because it's something that's in the future?
No, you're not judged. You're not judged for a bad thought.
Okay. I mean, you shouldn't do it, but it's not a sin
Because
per
since
se.
you didn't actually bring it to fruition, you're not held accountable for it.
Okay.
It's like a person that says something, even if I feel like killing him. Said the words, but it's only it's a matter of speech.
Right. Yes, most people are not actually considering murdering someone when they say something like that. Just they're angry. Just
Right.
trying to vent.
Correct. Okay.